Good morning, Facebook. My name is Chuck Fagan, and this is a special presentation of the Better Savannah Facebook page. This morning, we'll be joined by a second candidate running for the open state assembly seat in House District 163. That's the seat being vacated and retired by Representative Craig Gordon. Last night, we had the first candidate on. A few housekeeping items. We'll be interviewing Alan Westbrook this morning immediately. This afternoon at 3:30, we'll be interviewing Mark Anthony Smith. At 5:30, we'll be interviewing Derek Malo. And at 7:30, we will be interviewing Matthew Swanson, the remaining three candidates for this open Democratic primary. Tomorrow afternoon at 5 p.m., we'll be broadcasting live a debate for the 1st District County Commission primary between Mr. Kevin Hyman and Mr. Ben Waniker. And next weekend, we will have our main attraction, so to speak, with our district attorney's primary debate at 1:30 on Saturday and our Democratic chairman's debate at 5:30 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. All of those will be broadcast live here on the page. And again, as I mentioned last night, I want to give a special shout out to our founder and chairman of Better Savannah, Mr. John McMasters. Better Savannah was founded last year to be the area's leading independent expenditure committee focused on better progressive public policy outcomes here at the state and local level. So with that, I want to bring in our guest this morning, Ms. Allen Westbrook. Please take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers. Tell us why you're running for House District 163.
Good morning, and thanks so much to Better Savannah for having me on. I am Alan Westbrook. I'm a Savannah native. I grew up downtown in the historic district. I attended parochial school at Cathedral Day School. I'm dating myself because it doesn't exist anymore. And I graduated from Savannah Christian. I left the state to attend college out of state at a women's college in Virginia. I returned to Georgia to attend law school at University of Georgia. I've been a practicing attorney since 2001. I practiced in Atlanta for 2 years in a litigation firm. 2 years of Atlanta traffic was enough, and I headed home to Savannah in 2003. So I've been working and practicing in Savannah since 2003, mostly with a number of private practice firms. But I also had a stint as the pro se staff attorney at Superior Court of Chatham County, where I supported all 6 Superior Court judges with their pro se caseload. Some of that was indigent work, and some of it was helping pro se litigants navigate the divorce and custody process, which is, getting kind of more and more difficult for people to do without lawyers because of the requirements for custody and child support and all those sort of things. I have been practicing with Johnson Croiter since 2013. With Johnson Croiter, I do more domestic work, divorce, custody, other issues facing families, some plaintiffs' personal injury work, support, and also I'm developing a new practice of helping with pension division. In 2013, I became a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is a nonpartisan group of grassroots advocates, mothers, and others who are dedicated to policy solutions to gun violence, education solutions to gun violence. And I did that work for, until the day before I qualified, until March of this year. In my last 2 years with that organization, I was the state legislative lead for Moms Demand Action. So for the Georgia chapter. So in that capacity, I was, our group is very state legislature focused as opposed to Washington focused. So I was tracking bills in the General Assembly, watching committee hearings, training volunteers to be better citizen advocates, using my legal skills to sort of help people understand the bills, and just sort of dealing with whatever came up, which could be, anything at very short notice with the General Assembly. What else is relevant? I am a mother of 3 in a blended family. I am a member of Asbury Memorial Church. I've done some, they've done some great ministry also related to gun violence prevention, and they're just a great sort of witness for social justice in Savannah generally. I think that's mostly what's relevant to our topic today.
Sure. Well, I want to get into some questions, but I want to start with what's on everybody's mind this week, locally here in the Savannah area, but really across our country. I'm talking about the case of Ahmaud Arbery, about 60 miles south of here in Glenn County. It's a very, very tragic event. I think the angering piece of it is the time delay between the incident on February 23rd and the fact that it is now May 9th. When the alleged killers were arrested, just in the last 36 hours. I want you to give our viewers your thoughts on the case. What should the legislature do in response to runaway district attorneys who, clearly are not administering equal justice under the law?
Those are really good questions. It is absolutely a tragic case. And Brunswick is very close to us. My father actually lives in Brunswick, so it's a community that I feel like I know, and it hits really, really close to home for us here in Savannah because it could have been here. And of course, it's these kinds of shootings have happened in communities all over the U.S. But I agree with you. The delay is really, really troubling, and it really did not reach my attention personally until the New York Times covered it. So I think it's really, really troubling that it took the Times beginning to cover it for us to know anything about it. I have friends on St. Simon's, of diverse backgrounds, and they even on the ground said, we knew nothing about this locally. So it is troubling. I think in the beginning, before all the information about how law enforcement handled this came out, my first thought was this the pandemic? Everybody's distracted. Local news was in crisis before the pandemic. And I'm sure that the pandemic has exacerbated that. But of course, what we have found out since then is it appears, and I'm a lawyer, so I am careful with language. But it certainly appears that, if the district attorney had that horrific video and didn't act, it really does appear that there was, some really troubling decision making in Brunswick. I think it went to Waycross next, and is now in Liberty County. So yeah, it is really, really troubling. And of course there were relationships between and among, prosecutors in some of those offices. The issue that it brings up for me, and I will also just say, my legal expertise is in the civil side of the practice of law and not the criminal side of the practice of law. So I would defer to my criminal practitioners, on both sides, prosecutors and defense attorneys. In fact, I'm sure that will be a fascinating discussion when you have your DA interviews. But what it brings up for me is, especially when you kind of ask me to look at it through the lens of the state legislature, and of course I'm a gun violence prevention advocate as well, is the extent to which these laws, like every law, when race intersects, the effects of laws are different. And we know that when race intersects with gun laws, the effects are different. We are a stand your ground state. We have, what that basically means is that if you were in a situation where you have the ability to retreat from that situation and be safe, you don't have to in Georgia. You can keep right on going. And it appears that these gentlemen, took it upon themselves. I shouldn't say gentlemen. they took it upon themselves to really handle this situation on their own. They called 911. 911 asked them, okay, but what are they doing wrong? You know, for me, there were such strong echoes of the Trayvon Martin case in Florida, where, you know, a citizen took it upon himself to act as law enforcement. I have personally not watched the video. I have heard that it's horrific. I came down on the side of giving the family some dignity on that. But I understand the other side of that, which is these things are really happening and we have to witness them. So, you know, however people resolve that, I understand it. I think the video is likely what will give this family justice potentially. And there wasn't one in the Trayvon case. So, yeah.
Let me ask you a couple follow-ups. Just because of your legal background and your gun violence advocacy background, I think you bring a really good perspective to the table. Should the Assembly redact the citizen arrest powers in the official code of Georgia in response to this incident?
I mean, I would like to see us, I mean, I haven't been doing this work for 7 years because I think we've got great laws as they are. You know, I think stand your ground is deeply, deeply troubling. I think it is, you know, it is responsible for the deaths of too many, you know, Black men and boys. I think that, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see us look at that because I think until we do this civic experiment where every single one of us goes through implicit bias training and, you know, understands how the mind works, then yeah, I think those laws are really problematic. And I'm sort of speaking in hyperbole. I'd love to see us take on a civic experiment like that. I'm not exactly sure how we do it. I have personally been through implicit bias training in a couple of different circumstances. One of those as part of my continuing legal education, and one of those as a Moms in Action volunteer. They're very serious about diversity, equity, and inclusion in that group, and it's really, really revealing, you know, to go through it. You know, it is. It's how our brains are wired to make quick decisions, and when you are making those kinds of quick decisions in a situation with someone you don't know when you're armed, it's going to be deadly.
You know, I think probably the most astounding frustration about the case is that, you know, again, it took about 2 months for no action to happen. And, you know, I think hats off to Vic Reynolds at GBI. You know, within 24 hours exactly of receiving that case, they found probable cause for felony murder and aggravated assault and made the arrests of those 2 men. You know, as you mentioned, there was a lot of conflicts involved with that local DA's office, the local police there with these 2 suspects. You know, what can the legislature do to prevent delays of justice like this in the future, whether it be codifying conflicts of interest and requiring them to be turned over to the GBI? You know, what do you envision as being able to be changed in response to this?
I really think that the laws are the main issue more than the, you know, from where I sit, at least more than the regulation of DAs. I mean, like, you know, attorneys we do have all kinds of ethical requirements. We're a self-policing, you know, bar association. So some disclosure of those kinds of things would be great. But I agree with you. The conflicts are really, really troubling. And, you know, the message to the family that their son's killing wasn't a priority for law enforcement is deeply, deeply disturbing.
Thank you. I think all of us who have read the story or watched the video are deeply disturbed by what we have learned in the lack of justice being carried out down there. We're going to follow this case closely. I believe should you win your election, this will be heavily discussed, both in the context of technical legal things, but perhaps in the context of hate crimes legislation finally passing here in Georgia. I do want to move on, though, and I want to ask you a question, Ann. Chatham County is a majority women county. We have not had a woman in the delegation since Regina Thomas in 2009. We supported Regina for her election for mayor last year. Talk a little bit about what it would mean for Chatham County to have a woman in the delegation again. And you're the only person, the only woman running for this race right now.
That's true. Yeah. I think it's really important. I'm passionate about representation, and I'm passionate about having a delegation that looks like our area and reflects our area's values. And we've got some good members of the delegation. But I definitely think that when you are looking at some of the issues that we're dealing with in Georgia, some of the priorities that the legislature has taken on, the lived experiences of women are missing in our leadership. We definitely saw that with the abortion ban 481 last year. It's deeply troubling to be lectured to about people who don't live this and don't have that experience. I think also in issues like when we're talking about healthcare and we're talking about the maternal mortality crisis, that's something that's a huge issue in our state too. And I should say, these outcomes are not good for women in Georgia, but they are exponentially worse for African-American women in Georgia. So we need to be clear on that. Rural women also, then we kind of get that intersection with the rural healthcare crisis. So I think it's really important. I will also say it's a little bit hard to make it work too, because we're 250 miles from the Capitol. And so it's, when so many women have caregiving responsibilities, I have caregiving responsibilities. And so that can impact our ability to have the kind of representation of women as well. So yeah, I think it's really, really important. I wish for more than just one, but yeah. Great.
Well, let's get into some more questions. The recent city elections were historic last year as voters basically didn't return any incumbents, including in districts that touch the district you're running for this year, in the 2nd and 3rd districts specifically. What were your takeaway from the results of those elections? Where do you think politics are headed here locally? And what do you think that means for the elections this year?
It definitely was a dramatic outcome, without a doubt. I think that certainly city voters wanted a change. I think that you could interpret them as the outcome as a desire to center and prioritize the needs of residents potentially. It could be interpreted as, sort of a pushback on the interests of tourism and hotel developers. I think, there are conclusions to be drawn about the leadership style potentially of the previous administration too. But I think what's most interesting about it is, the extent to which voters really elevated people who were on the ground in the community doing the work. Voters picked those people, people like Linda Wilder Bryan, who's, been doing the work, been helping kids get backpacks and bikes and tea parties for girls and, dinners for boys and helping the homeless and all of those kinds of things. And she had been doing that work on the ground, and now she's still doing the same work, just with a bigger platform. So I think people like Linda, Alicia Miller Blakely, those were people who were they had been showing up in their communities. They were known, they had built relationships. They weren't people who just showed up and said, hey, I'm ready to lead, basically, elect me.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Almost every council candidate ran last year on bringing about term limits for city aldermen, in addition to just the mayor. Since the new term has started, the legislative agenda for the city of Savannah has been updated to include a charter change for term limits. Should you win your election, will you file a home rule bill to change the charter of the city of Savannah for at least 3 terms. We would prefer 2, but I think we'll settle for 3 as a term limit for those city aldermen.
If that's a priority of council, then it's something that I would follow up on. I definitely do recall that many of them did campaign on that. And if they, so yeah, that's my recollection as well. I have not heard, have they actually procedurally, pursued that? If they have, then it's.
They took a vote. So, their legislative agenda has a vote that's taken on it by the council itself. So the legislative agenda was adopted by this council. And, I think item number 6 or 5 on the list of 10 or 12 items was term limits for the charter. I have heard different answers from different delegation members. Some delegation members seem to believe that the council should debate and pass an actual resolution requesting the charter change. Some feel that the legislative agenda being adopted by council vote is itself enough of a procedural move to let them know that they should work on that change. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out. I do want to move on to some broader statewide issues with the time we have. I want to talk about Medicaid expansion. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately affects districts like yours. Here in 163, we're a majority minority district. Black Georgians are more likely to contract or pass away from the virus, face layoffs and furloughs in industries like hospitality and tourism. Immediate Medicaid expansion would save lives. How can you get the legislature and a Republican governor to act on this? Do you think the waivers are a good alternative to full Medicaid expansion? Talk a little bit about Medicaid expansion for us.
Sure. I support full Medicaid expansion. I do not think the waivers are enough. The ACA is now basically 10 years old, and the ACA was designed to cover those uninsured individuals through Medicaid expansion. So I support full Medicaid expansion. Without it, we still have, I want to say, between 700 and 800,000 Georgians in the coverage gap. We've got $40-ish billion in federal monies that we're not, that we're leaving on the table. Now, granted, that would require some investment by our state as well, but that's money that we shouldn't be walking away from. And you've got a pretty deep dive in some of your other questions about the economics. And so, yeah, I think full Medicaid expansion is the way to go. It definitely, we already had a crisis in rural healthcare Georgia well before COVID-19. We were already hemorrhaging healthcare resources, healthcare professionals from those parts of our state. We were already dealing with the maternal mortality crisis. Again, much worse in the rural areas because many of them don't even have an OBGYN in their entire county. We were dealing with, I think, 7 hospital closures in rural Georgia. So we had a crisis before, and COVID-19 has changed everything. I don't even think we can really fully anticipate all the repercussions of COVID-19, but I know that the pressure it is putting on our hospitals, so many other areas. There's so many other areas in the healthcare sector that aren't even running right now. So that's another piece of this. So I would absolutely be for full Medicaid expansion. You were correct to point out the racial disparity that's there. Some of that is just historic underinvestment in public health care generally. Healthcare as an industry underserving Black Americans, Black Georgians. And of course, many of those people, many Black Georgians work in sectors of the economy that put them at greater risk of contracting the illness. And of course, they work in, many of them in some of those sectors where they're going to be laid off or furloughed. So yes, full Medicaid expansion.
I want to ask you a follow-up here, if you don't mind. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, that's okay.
The legislature is due to reconvene just after the primary, the general primary, somewhere around June 10th, June 11th, maybe. You're likely, if you make the runoff, to still be in a contested election. Are you planning to be lobbying the delegation and the legislature writ large about these issues? Jeff Reno, who's running in House District 164 next door to you, has said that they need to expand the Medicaid immediately because of the crisis that's deepening, and it's only going to get worse. You will not take office until January of next year. What can you do to make the legislature act quickly? Because I think we need them to act quickly to prevent more necessary deaths from the virus.
I agree with you. Well, the legislature is well accustomed to hearing from me, so that they would hear from me on this issue too. I've been in the gun violence prevention space, but when you get focused on the legislature, it sort of bleeds out into all the other areas, because you're really seeing, what your leadership is doing, what your leadership is not doing. So yes, we needed Medicaid expansion years ago, and now we can't. It's a crisis. So yeah.
Thank you for those answers. I want to shift to a local topic here. I will tell you, I have conducted. These Better Savannah has conducted 14 interviews for candidates running for county commission seats this year. The universal theme in these conversations is that eventually all roads lead back to the state, right? And so there's this very much parental relationship between the state of Georgia and Chatham County. And the first issue in this kind of series of questions I want to talk about is the Port of Savannah and Georgia Ports Authority. The port is obviously a big economic generator for our county and for our area. GPA has said they plan on doubling the size and capacity of the port over the next 7 to 8 years. Despite the success of the port, there's no direct payments to Chatham County, the school board, or the municipalities that are directly affected by this growth. Given the impacts of the port on our community with congestions, road damage, and pollution, should our delegation be negotiating with the governor for permanent revenue from the GPA to the local municipalities in the county, since they're directly impacted by this growth?
That's a good question. The port is indeed a huge economic driver for this area. And sometimes it seems that but for the port, and to a lesser degree tourism, Atlanta might forget that we even exist down here. But the port is a huge economic driver that can't be underestimated. They are a source of jobs. They're a source of unionized jobs, which is rare in our state. We're not a very union friendly state. And, the longshoremen, the stevedores, those are jobs that are high paying, that can be done by the workforce that we have right here. That with a workforce that has the skills to do those jobs. So I think they're important. That doesn't even account for all the ancillary small businesses that, that are generated from the activities of the port. As far as payments, it is a state entity. It is not located in the city. I am not sure procedurally how payments would work. Like, what would our procedural vehicle for getting those payments be? I do understand your question, and I think we need to acknowledge the political reality that we live in, which is that we have a state government that is asserting more and more and more control. One of the parts of my platform has been to sort of point out some of these areas where it really makes more sense to take back that control for local government. It could be in labor laws. It could be in, in the gun violence prevention space. We can't do anything about our gun laws and how they affect our city. Confederate monuments, the list goes, short-term rentals, on and on and on and on. But I also think we need to look at the fact that our state legislature is at this moment trying to take over Hartsfield. So I'm not sure that we're really being realistic if we think we're going to go to the state and say, hey, give us this, give us that. I would like to see us build on the areas where the port is successful. There are political power brokers in Atlanta that are getting the ancillary logistics of the port up to their areas in Gainesville and Dalton. I would like to see us look for ways that we can build on the port's success and generate more jobs that way. I just don't think we're in a political reality where we're going to extract payments that way right now.
I want to talk some more about this, Ann. I think this is a fascinating conversation. That this singular institution in Chatham County is very pivotal to the next 10 years of success in this area. Having spoken to Republican and Democratic officials the last 5 years about this issue constantly, the amount of truck traffic we have, the damage to those roads, the pollution and health outcomes of our citizens locally. Again, the port is going to double its capacity and size in the span of just 8 years, right? If the state is not going to become a better partner, then I would suggest that our committee will be advocating for the county to no longer be a good partner to the port. And if that means that we're going to tear up every ancillary road that leads to the port and rebuild it every 2 years to slow the growth of the port, because they will not pay some direct payments to the county and the municipalities affected by that growth, then I think that's what we're going to advocate for. There are enabling county ordinances with the port. There are county-controlled roads that lead in and around that port. I think we have got to force a better deal from the state. And if the state won't play ball, then we're going to have to make some uncomfortable decisions here at home. So if you want to respond to any of that, please take some time. We'll move on to another question afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I didn't really touch on in my first response, you do mention the environmental impact. I think the environmental impact is worth mentioning. I really think the greatest environmental challenge to our area as a coastal community is sea level rise. And we're not really talking about that, and we should be, and we should be talking about a comprehensive plan for that. But yeah, I mean, there are environmental impacts from the port. I think that there are things that the port puts in as well, and I just think in this political environment, I'd like to see us get more benefit down here rather than just focus on the less the negative effects.
Good. Let's talk about education. The two largest expenditures in the state of Georgia budget are healthcare and education, but I believe education is number one by just a little bit. Teachers were promised $5,000 raises by this governor in his election 2 years ago. So far, he's gotten about halfway done there, but given the climate and the expected shortfalls that we'll talk about a little bit later here, how's the state going to come up with the money for those teacher raises? Teachers seem to be teaching from home and have learned Zoom, pretty much overnight to deal with this. Do you think that schools will resume in-person teaching in August?
I think that there's a lot we don't know about this. I don't think we can predict what August is going to look like, to be perfectly honest. I don't know if we will, if we're going to be dealing with a second wave in August, if we'll be fully out of our first wave in August. So it's hard to see whether we're going to be reconvening in person. I don't think, and I say this as a parent, I don't think that the online learning that all the schools have had to put together on the fly is any substitute for the kinds of teaching that they were doing before in the classroom. So I don't think those two things are comparable. I can acknowledge that there may be ways that life is just different post-COVID than it was before, and we might eventually be moving in that direction. But I think with schools, there are such disparate circumstances in terms of what various homes have. Do they have tablets, desktops, the technology to make that learning meaningful? Are they food insecure? Were they households that were relying on getting, two of their child's 3 meals a day at school? So there's just a lot of factors there that I think we need to look at. As far as the budget piece of it goes, we weren't fully, and I think you allude to this in some of what you said in your questions. We hadn't fully emerged from the effects of the Great Recession. And of course, this year during the session, we were already looking as a state at cuts. We'd already had our General Assembly, adjourn for, I think, maybe 10 days to work on the budget, because, even within the Republican Party that controls, both branches, there was deep disagreement about how to handle that. So we had a really serious budget situation even before this happened. And again, now we're in a pandemic where the 15-20% of people who are employed are affected.
Sure.
So,
I want to talk about the budget in just a minute, but I got some more education questions here. The last Republican governor, Nathan Deal, attempted a statewide takeover of schools known as Opportunity School District. Your potential predecessor was one of a dozen Democrats to support the bill. If the state is going to single out failing schools district by district and take them over, shouldn't they be offering more funding to fix these broken schools rather than attempting to shut them down, basically?
I agree. They should. I think that what the General Assembly needs to be providing in terms of leadership on the issue of education is, we do have a constitutional obligation as a state to educate every child with a free public education. We need to agree that that is a value and be starting from a place of, this is a human right. This is a right every child has. This is a public good that benefits all of us. And yes, we do need to be funding it. I don't agree with the Opportunity School District as a solution to failing schools. I think we have some real challenges in our schools. And in a big state like Georgia, those challenges are one thing in Savannah, Chatham, Metropolitan, SCC, PPS. They're another thing in suburban Atlanta. They're another challenge in rural Georgia. But I don't think, a takeover, of for-profit charters is the solution.
One thing I have noticed in the last decade, especially, is this advent of grading teachers, right? We give teachers a score, an A, a B, a 92% effectiveness rating, whatever the scale is. And one thing that struck me is that in the last decade, we've been singling out failing schools, but also singling out great and poor teachers by these metrics that we've created. So it just boggles my mind that nobody has come up with an idea where you find some way to call it like a combat pay program. If you go and serve in the United States military and you're in a war zone, you're going to get hazard pay. You're going to get war zone pay. You're going to get tax-free money on those deployments. And I think we've got to come up with a solution where we can incentivize great teachers to teach in struggling schools for a 3 to 5 year commitment. I don't know if that means we need to incentivize them with, large bonuses or salary increases or paying off of student loans. I don't know what we could do, but it seems to me we've got this imbalance. We have failing schools over here, and we have great teachers in non-failing schools. We've got to get the great teachers from the non-failing schools to go to the failing schools. And then you could also say you got to get the teachers at the failing schools to go teach at non-failing schools so that they can see what another school is like. So just talk a little bit about some creative ideas you might have in the education, specifically K through 12.
Sure. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about combat pay. If we pursue something like that, let's please call it something other than combat pay, because I do think
sure.
The framing can be important. But yes, how do we incentivize teachers to take on, teaching in challenging educational settings? I am not sure that, the idea behind combat pay of a bonus, would we be able to afford as a state enough of a bonus that makes it worthwhile? I think that we are making teachers and schools our last, our last line of defense on everything that we're not willing to address every other issue. We don't want to address poverty. We don't want to, I know we want to address them, but they're hard. How do we fix them? And so we just push it all on teachers and schools. I think, again, this pandemic is just full of so many examples. Schools are feeding kids, and God bless them. It's God's work. But, all of these other things that we're not addressing of poverty, we're now pushing down to teachers when teachers are really
Sure.
just, they're supposed to be educating. And, can they do that when we push so many other things on them? I definitely want to see teachers paid more. That's hard to do for all the reasons we're talking about. The prestige of the profession should be higher than it is as well.
It's a great point. That's a great point.
So I think we need to be doing the hard work of addressing poverty in our state, of addressing systemic racism. We have places in our state where we've really abandoned public schools, and that's a part of Savannah's history. Is we abandoned public schools at the time of desegregation, and no matter how much our intentions are better now, it is so hard to unring that bell of that decision that we made.
Right.
So many of us 50 years ago. So
you make really good points about poverty. I want to ask you a couple of questions about the safety net here in Georgia. According to the last census, which of course we're in a census year, please fill out your census, folks. According to the census 10 years ago, Chatham County had 17.3% residents living at the federal poverty level or below. The nationwide poverty average for counties is 13.5%. Given the effects of the coronavirus, I think we can all expect that these rates will only rise. There's two specific policies I want to discuss. The first one is temporary assistance for needy families. This is a state block grant from the TANF federal funding legislation. The state has very wide, flexibility to determine eligibility for what's called NSRT, needy non-recurring payments for families. Would you encourage expanding the eligibility gap? Because of this crisis, I think currently you have to be making less than 100% of the median or the poverty income line to be eligible for these funds. There's $70 million of banked reserves in the budget right now that have not been spent. Is it wise for those monies to just be sitting there gaining interest, or should we be spending them and investing them in those of our citizens at the bottom?
I think everything is on the table right now with this pandemic. It's going to hit the poor the worst. When you don't have money, you don't have choices. And so I would absolutely be open to that, to looking at that. I think, those people are going to need relief from wherever it can come, from the state, from the federal government, possibly too. So yes, I would be open to that.
Another policy area in the same area is the unemployment benefits that is managed by the State Department of Labor. Commissioner Mark Butler has taken a lot of heat in the last few weeks. We are not paying the same amount in terms of the claims that are being made for unemployment. We have not paid out the same amount as the claims are. We seem to be behind. Another candidate in your race mentioned last night that, at the current pace, the Department of Labor, that program could be out of money in a matter of 2 to 3 months. What should the state of Georgia be doing about unemployment benefits? I want you to keep in mind that in the last recession, which I think we all agree, this one's going to be worse. The last recession took 75 months for pre-recession employment levels to stabilize. How can we make it for 5 or 6 years without jobs coming back quickly and without unemployment benefits being extended?
I would say I think there's a lot we don't know. I agree. The outlook right now is bleak. But I think there's a lot we don't know. We don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know, whether we're going to have a second wave of it. We don't know what a vaccine situation might look like. So there's really just major question marks. So it's hard to get really specific about what the policy prescriptions are going to be. But yeah, I think everything is on the table. We're a state that has to have a balanced budget. And so, how we solve this within that constraint is going to be really difficult. It's going to take creative thinking. It may take some federal intervention too. This is, when you're in a crisis, it does sort of force you to get creative. And we're even seeing that in Washington, which is, get creative up there and actually come together to solve problems, then there's hope for all of us. So it's going to be really difficult. I mean, we have to look at, at how long those reserves are going to last.
Well, besides education and a strong safety net, I think the obvious third leg to a stool of defeating poverty is jobs, and more importantly, wages of those jobs, right? Preemption is something that is an issue in a lot of areas in the state of Georgia, but the state of Georgia does not allow municipalities or counties to set a higher minimum wage than its own state minimum wage, which is actually a lower minimum wage than the federal minimum wage. So, what can we do to change preemption? And then I've got another question about CETA I want to ask you after that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of passionate about preemption, to tell you the truth, because it does come up in so many different contexts, including in the labor setting. It's not only just minimum wage that they preempt fair scheduling, they preempt prevailing wage. And I feel like that, I have a real pragmatic approach to this stuff. And I like to look at what can we get done in the environment that we're actually working in. And, I think that some of those preemption laws might be lower hanging fruit potentially. They're not quite as enshrined as something like right to work. That was sort of, the preemption was kind of a 2000s trend that I feel like we could maybe beat back. And also we have that issue in Savannah. We have that issue. I have no doubt in Augusta, Macon, a lot of those settings. So I'd like to see us kind of band together with some of those places and flex our muscle a little bit in the legislature, because wages are a huge issue. And in Georgia, we have such an imbalance with a huge metropolitan area like Atlanta and everybody else. We just don't have the balance. And in Savannah, we have, Savannah is a wonderful place to live if you're a professional, if you're a doctor, lawyer, engineer, whatever, accountant. We have tourism, which is, the jobs are not, the wages are not what we need, but we don't really have anything in between, or not a lot in between. We don't have those other jobs that really build a thriving middle class the way they do in Atlanta. So I would like to see some of that prosperity spread around. And I would love to see preemption be sort of a place that we start, because our local municipalities could be setting the example as good employers and, for our area.
I think preemption is a large issue. I hope that it's low-hanging fruit, as you said. I want to follow up with a local question about CETA. The Savannah Economic Development Authority is currently chartered so that 2/3 of its membership on the board of directors is appointed by the county and the city respectively, but the last third is appointed by its own board. The Savannah Economic Development Authority puts together deals in exchange for generous property tax abatements on behalf of the Chatham County, City of Savannah, and school board. The loss of this property tax revenue is created in exchange for new job creation, but CETA never requires an independent audit of the promised jobs nor the wages. Currently, like I said, it's appointed by the city and the county 2/3, but by itself for the last third. Two questions here. Will you support requiring an independent audit of the deals that are put together for in exchange for property tax abatements for jobs? And then will you support a charter change that would bring in the rest of the municipalities, perhaps for that last 1/3 of appointments to that board? I think Savannah is much more of a regional economy these days, especially in that logistics world, than it is a city economy. So just talk about those two items on CETA for us.
Sure. I think it's definitely fair to look at CETA to make sure that they are adding value in the way that they are intended to add value. A lot of the input does come from city and county. And I would want to hear from those stakeholders before I would really address the enabling legislation. It's not it's an important issue. It's not an issue that I hear much about from voters when I'm campaigning. We do have a brand new city council. Many of them, despite having such great experience in the community, are new to city government. And of course, they immediately got thrust into a pandemic. We are also in the midst of county elections, so that are going to change the face of our commission. So I would want to hear from those stakeholders before I really expressed a view on enabling legislation. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly fair to look at CETA and make sure that they're adding value.
Sure. We've got just a few minutes remaining, and I want to talk quickly about SPLOST legislation. Special purpose local option sales tax is a very controversial issue, both here and around the state. The laws, much like CETA's charter, a lot of these things have not been updated since the 80s, basically. Should counties and municipalities be able to use bank SPLOST funds in a declared state of emergency to maintain core services? Do you think we should be working on constitutional amendments for SPLOST? And then one more specific question is, should eSPLOST be allowed to be used for wraparound services, which is also another constitutional amendment thing, most likely in the legislature? So give us a few comments about SPLOST laws, and then we'll try to wrap up.
Sure. Well, I'll start with eSPLOST. eSPLOST is for capital projects. And I think for a lot of us, when we look at schools and we look at what our worries are for schools, what we feel like the really pressing needs are for schools, we aren't necessarily thinking of beautiful shiny buildings. Not that they're not important, but we are thinking of class sizes and teacher ratios and wraparound services and that sort of thing. So I'm open to that. I would need to learn more. But yeah, I agree. You can have a brand new, beautiful building and still not be getting what you need for kids inside the building who are trying to learn.
You got to have teachers that are teaching inside of it, no matter how nice and new it is. We didn't get a lot of chance to talk about the budget. One quick question, since we're on the topic of constitutional amendments. The legislature passed an amendment that banned the legislature itself from raising income taxes beyond 6%. An opponent of yours mentioned that this is the flattest tax system amongst almost any of the states in the country, given that a $10 million earner pays the same 5.75% as a $10,000 earner here in the state of Georgia. Would you support a constitutional amendment reversing the current amendment that would allow you to, at the very least, maybe put in progressive brackets of taxation in Georgia? Go ahead.
I would definitely be open to that, for sure. I think, again, we're in a situation where we cannot foreclose any possibility. We hadn't fully recovered from the last Great Recession. Now we're in a pandemic that's going to have, huge effects on our economy. So I am definitely open to something like that. The constitutional amendment does hamstring us somewhat from adjusting to situations like this, from figuring out how to weather these recessions. So I would definitely be open to a reversal of that.
Well, Alan Westbrook, I want to thank you again for coming on our show here this morning. I told you I was going to try and get you out of here by about 10:30. So again, just a reminder to everybody that's watching, please, first of all, like and subscribe to this page, share this video with your friends, whether or not you are in the District 163 or supporting this candidate or not. It's very important for everybody here to get involved locally and be aware of these issues. Again, I want to take a personal note and wish our chair and founder, John McMasters, a happy birthday today. That's why he's not on this call with us yet. But he definitely is watching, and we will be reviewing all of the videos from these candidates. Like I had said to you earlier, I hope that we'll see you back in here in the runoff, because we don't think that this race will be decided on June 9th. But please take a few minutes here to give some conclusion thoughts and tell voters how to get in touch with you, find you on the internets.
Sure. Thanks for giving me that chance, and thanks for having
Absolutely.
me. Period. You can go to my website, www.AlanWestbrookGA163.com, to see my full platform. We touched on some of those issues today. One thing we didn't talk much about was climate change and sea level rise, and that is, in my opinion, a really serious challenge we need to be preparing for. I'm the only candidate in my race who's had that in my platform. So I think we need to be talking about that. I think what I bring to this is a unique skill set, which is my skills as an advocate. I've developed them professionally as a lawyer. I've developed them for 7 years doing issue advocacy in the Capitol. The other thing I bring to this is relationships. I am a trusted partner with leaders in Atlanta, and I'm a trusted partner with leaders in Savannah. They know me. I can work with them. I can help build consensus across party lines because I've done it as an advocate. I've figured out how to do that. I've been endorsed by Senator Jen Jordan, by former Mayor Edna Jackson. So I think that goes to that issue of my being trusted by both of those leadership communities. Thanks.
Great. Well, look, again, thank you for coming on. This is a very bellwether race in the primaries here. I think a lot of us who are involved in politics are watching it closely. And like I've said, I hope that we'll see you back here in the runoff for another round of discussion, hopefully with whoever your opponent is, to get a good debate in and see really where the differentiations lie. There are so many topics and so little time. I would have loved to talk more about climate change since we're a coastal community. I will make a note that hopefully we can discuss that in the future. Thank you for stepping up and running. Thank you for offering yourself for service in a tough year to be doing so. We wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail. Please stay safe. And Savannah, please remember to register to vote if you have not already. The last day is coming up, and the last day to get your ballots in, by mail is the day before the primary on June 8th. So please make sure to participate. We have seen a very large increase in the number of requested ballots. It's a very good sign. Potentially, this could end up being a higher turnout election. So every vote matters. Please make sure to fill out your ballot. I believe mine is right here on my couch, right behind my head. So I'll be working on that later today. And again, please join us this afternoon for the remaining 3 candidates for House District 163 for their interviews from 3:30 to 7:30. Again, once again, thank you, Ann, for setting aside the time. Please stay safe, and we'll talk to you later, Facebook. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks, John. Happy birthday, John.
Thanks so much.